Welcome to the world of Nina Bellavoce and her time travel adventures. Each episode highlights a period ghost encounter in New Orleans. This is historical fiction and is copyrighted under the U.S. and international copyright laws.
When Cousin Benicio and I connected, our lengthy discussions often focused on our gifts. He taught me techniques to control them, channel them, and for the most part, use them for my own benefit and advantage. Sometimes, though, these abilities proved more annoying than helpful. With some coaching from him, I learned to create a barrier around myself to protect me from any entities demanding attention, and it worked for several years, until now. That young man, William, pierced the veil of protection that I fabricated. How did he do that? Why did he do that? More importantly, how did he know I could perceive him? I picked up my pace and headed back to Josephine's room. I needed some quiet time to sort this out. What did I need to do to keep them away? When I decide to open up, they are always there, waiting. "Just wait a few minutes if you don't like the weather," the shop owner told me. I covered my head with a stray plastic bag I found floating on the crooked slate sidewalk. "Does it ever not rain here?" I asked as I wiped my feet on the straw mat just inside the grocery store. "I arrived 3 days ago and all it's done is rain." The shop owner scratched his head, careful not to destroy the comb-over of the last few strands of hair left on his shiny paint. "Well, if it isn't raining, darling, it feels like it is. Fact of life, I guess, for Louisiana in the summer." And he brushed a few muffaletta crumbs off of the counter left by the last sloppy patron. They landed on the well-worn wooden floor that he'd swept every night for the past 38 years. The Central Grocery, another New Orleans mainstay, served the world-famous sandwich they called the muffaletta. Basically, it was a huge, round, heavy bun filled with assorted fresh lunch meats. But the real treat is the olive relish. Tart, bitter, and a bit crunchy, the combination of chewy bread, cold meat, and the stiff olive garnish brought folks to this lunch counter here from all over the world. So, naturally, I ordered a small sandwich, if you can call it small. I watched tourists and locals come and go, announced by the antique bells hanging precisely over the door so the wooden frame hits them as the door swings upon entrance or exit. Some folks knew exactly what they wanted, and others let their curiosity lose them in the nostalgia of the place. Mostly from my high stool facing the wall at the narrow counter, I was invisible, just as I liked it. After finishing my sandwich, I stepped out of the century-old shop and almost tripped over a jutting threshold with 100 years of stories to tell. I steadied myself by holding on to the well-crafted doorframe built by a carpenter sometime after the Civil War. For just a flash, I could see that young man as if he were right here before me today, carefully routing out the layers of the jam and fitting it just right with a craftsman's precision. His hammer tapped loudly as he secured the frame into place. The door stands proud and strong even today, welcoming patrons into the quaint shop by the same family for more than 50 years. I took 2 steps across the worn slate sidewalk and noticed that the rain accumulated in a mossy hole made by an absent piece of slate. I avoided that, too. Good Lord, I thought to myself, doesn't this city have sidewalk inspectors? Rain always does this to me. Ever since living in the desert, I find rain a rather necessary inconvenience. At times, with over 300 days of sunshine a year, we're glad to have an overcast day, and I take note of my mood on those days. But this was worse. It was rainy, breezy, and smelled like a swamp. For a minute, I scolded myself my destination choice. The air hung as thick as cheesecloth. I raised my head and squinted to keep the drops of water from running into my eyes. But as my eyes adjusted through the waterfall effect, I tried to focus, but the haze of the morning made it difficult to see them. Apparently, my efforts of blocking my perceptive gifts failed me again. About 20 feet in front of me, I saw translucent figures of people. One by one, they casually walked up to and through the walls, doors, and windows of a Creole cottage perched close to the sidewalk. I watched from the distance as they moved with purpose and delight to a happy gathering inside the structure. Unaffected by the rain, they didn't appear wet or even notice the weather. Quite accustomed to seeing ghosts or spirits all my life, this parade of people failed to frighten me. Oh, in the past, I'd seen my share of scary things, scenes mostly, like snapshots out of time. Mostly the communication I received from the other side dealt with energies trying to release itself from the confines of society. The energy struggle resulted either from unfinished business or loved ones holding on so tightly, even the deceased suffered. Over the years, I'd enjoyed hundreds of conversations with spirits, and frankly, they wore me out. I realized the lives of spirits reaching out to me had nothing to do with me. I served as a sounding board, a tenuous earthly connection for them, almost an excuse for them to hang around. I never witnessed any resolution to the interaction, so eventually I grew tired and put up my force field to prevent them from breaking into my world. Life is for the living, Benicio gently reminded me when we spoke of our common abilities. I set my attentions to be left alone after he passed on. Without his comforting discussion and counsel, I no longer enjoyed or wanted the abilities. If there was ever something I needed to know, or our agreement made in his final days would allow him to break through and contact me. A few nights ago, however, William found me. What changed in me? I knew something big was about to happen. The New Orleans home, the Creole Cottage, looked abandoned or at best unkempt. The pale blue shutters, soaring almost 6 feet tall, flanked each tall window of the cottage. The glass, wavy and coated with thick layers of rain and dust, almost hid the tattered curtains on the inside. The wooden paint chip siding buckled out in a few places, and fraught with dry rot, broke free and hung at 90-degree angles in the random spots on the facade. At one time, this structure housed a home, proud and typical of Creole families in the quarter. Now it served as a gathering of those who lived before. Unable to move, I watched, mesmerized with amazement and curiosity, while my heart pounded in my ears with excitement. The rain dripped off the plastic bag on my head and slid silently on my clothing in persistent streams. As I watched the spirits, I recognized who they once were. Unspoken communication revealed a riverboat gambler, a rum runner, a voodoo priestess, and a madam among the parade of souls ambling before me in no particular hurry. Each acknowledged my presence with either a nod or a tip of a hat or a tentative wave. They saw me and I saw them. Many more walked in before me, ignoring my presence as if I were an empty window display in an after-hours Royal Street antique jewelry store. Finally, one young woman, plainly dressed in a long brown calico dress in the style of the 18th century, turned and motioned for me to join her in entering the building. She appeared in her late teens or early 20s. She blended so well in the French Quarter backdrop that it looked as though she belonged there, no matter the century. She wore her mousy brown hair pulled gently up and back, drawn together by a pink ribbon. A few rebellious bundles of hair broke free of the tie and hung down around her face. Her brown eyes looked mournful, but at the same time hopeful. I saw right through her extended transparent arm, inviting me to this mysterious gathering. I stood there, transfixed in the middle of the street. Luckily, the construction barriers kept cars off that portion of the street. I blinked, turned away, and did everything I could to adjust my vision. She stood still, smiling with her hand outstretched, nodding in encouragement for me to join her. I didn't know what to do. My feet felt grounded into the street as I considered my options. I ventured to New Orleans for rest and relaxation, yet deep down inside I wanted some excitement too. But this? What would happen if I went with her? Would I make a transition from life to afterlife? If not, could I return to this exact same spot on the street? Would I experience a loss in time, or would time stand still? Maybe I'd get stuck. I didn't know, and it appeared that I needed to make a decision quickly because she kept looking over her shoulder as the others unflinchingly trailed into the cottage behind her. "Benicio, what do I do?" I whispered. He responded immediately, although not really in words, to go with her. He communicated that he'd stand beside me, stay with me, and wouldn't let anything bad happen to me. After a too brief consideration, I took a deep breath, shrugged my shoulders, and reached out to her. Although I couldn't feel her physically, I certainly felt her vibration when she took my hand. A nice soft sizzle let me know I had made contact with an entity for the first time. I stood on the wobbly slate step. She saw my hesitancy, and already half of her disappeared into the door, and I assumed through it. She nodded her head towards the room, and I found it oddly intriguing that her head didn't hit the door, but rather went through it when she tilted it. I took a longer than expected view of this very fascinating phenomenon. Then I climbed the remaining 2 steps to the front door. As I took her hand again, together we walked into the house, right through the door. My first experience as moving through objects as a human provided me with a sense of immortality and invincibility. When I realized I stood inside without benefit of actually opening the door, I expected some dramatic thing to happen, like angels singing or orchestral music announcing a mortal's arrival. Nothing. I celebrated alone, yet mystified and somewhat amused at my casual defiance of physics. Benicio proudly beamed at my suspension of reality, however brief. Strangely, I heard the rain on the tin roof, and also as it battered on the old worn window glass. The interior of the house remained remarkably cool and comfortable temperature. At first I saw an empty room spanning the width of the building. Nothing much here, just as well, I thought, as I stood in the cavernous front room of the cottage. The girl, still a few feet away from me now, grew more into focus, and I inquired about the others. She simply smiled and said, "Wait a few minutes and you'll see." Then my eyes slowly adjusted to the indoors, and as if materializing before me, the room filled with delicate furniture and elegant accessories. As if in pixelated animation, the room sparkled to life in full color and focus. My escort moved around me, and I found myself in the midst of dozens of spirits of people. Happy, laughing, talking. It was a party! Slowly, as each person's aura grew stronger and more solidly visual, I could clearly identify their clothing and hairstyle, much like earlier before on the street. Each hailed from a different era spanning several centuries. The revelers represented every imaginable social strata, culture, and origin. How could they communicate with one another so easily? Surely the language barrier would be an obstacle. I grew more intrigued by the way these spirits communicated with one another than by the very notion the party existed at all. Not only did I watch a soul party dance before me, but I was invited.